Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming today. We're going to get started in a minute here. I'm just going to double check that you guys can hear me. So just popped a question into the chat there. Hopefully you guys will let me know if you can hear me okay here. So my name's Leah. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. That's great. So I kind of organize all our workshops and webinars here at Two Hat Security. Just a few kind of quick little logistics before we get started. If you have any questions throughout the workshop, we are really excited to answer them. So we want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. So just click that Q&A button. This isn't the best screenshot in the world, but if you see the top there, just click that and you can pop your question in there. You can also use the chat feature like what I just used. Just make sure that you have it set to all panelists and attendees, and that way everyone can see your question. That just makes it a little bit easier. So I think I'm just waiting. I guess we'll get started here. We're waiting for a few other people to show up, but we may as well just dive into it. What do you think, Carlos?
Yeah, I think we can get going.
All right, let's get started. I'm going to hand this off to Carlos here. And again, we'll pause kind of throughout the workshop if you have any questions. Because we would like it to be as kind of interactive as possible. So I'm going to hand it off to Carlos now.
Excellent. Thank you, Leah. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to be here again and to have you join us again. I know that a few of you have attended our previous conversations, and this one is especially relevant right now. It really doesn't get old. It's such an important topic to be aware of in your moderation strategies. So I want to start us off by saying, okay, where does this idea come from in terms of having a protocol for breaking news and trending topics? So the original idea was, well, just a second here. I just want to make sure that you're seeing me as well. There you go. Now we're talking. Okay, so the original idea first came to mind in 2016, May 2016, when I was directing the client success department here at Two Hat Security. So back at that time, what happened specifically in May 2016 was there were some really bad news that happened in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And at that time, we were finding that, hey, we need to be more proactive. We need to have a good system to be able to act when trending news happen, because they definitely affect chat, even username creation. You're going to see this. However, we felt like we can't be reinventing the wheels, and we want to empower our clients, and we wanted to empower ourselves to have something we can rely on, a protocol we can rely on when trending topics come up, because you really don't have the time to be thinking about this when it happens. Language changes so fast, and nowadays things spread so fast, right? So another inspiration for this workshop that I'm giving you is my time being a moderator for Disney Interactive, which was between 2008 and 2014. And I was very fortunate to be part of teams who were very in tune with trending topics and pop culture. As a matter of fact, it was a key point of our research, a key point of our understanding, and it allowed us to make really good decisions when it came to moderation. And that brings us to now. That's where we are right now. I want to share this protocol with you so you can be prepared to not only react, and reacting is an important part because we don't know what's going to come up, so we need to react, but hopefully we have some guidelines that help us when that happens. Okay, so let's talk about the goals then. Let's really anchor this as in why are we doing this? Why does it matter? So first thing I want to drive with this workshop is fostering a knowledgeable team and a learning culture. And a team that actually makes really, really good decisions. A team that is efficient, that understands that internet lingo and knows what's going on. The second point is you definitely want to empower open speech in your community, right? You don't want to limit that conversation. And the third, which is so important, is to ensure civil discussions without jeopardizing user experience, without creating a negative experience in your community. So here's what we'll cover the key theme, and I'll be referring back to this, is you want to have that balance between your community expression and civil engagement, or if you will, between that expression and safety. So we'll talk about the impact of world news and events and pop culture on online communities. We're going to talk about pop culture and internet lingo. And we will also talk about the protocol itself. What are the steps and how can you rely on it and successfully apply it every time without having to change the method when a different type of trend is happening. Okay, so seems like everybody remembers that viral moment of 2017. Excellent. So let's start by the world news and events. And we are living at a time, of course, globalization is at full power. We are super connected. We know when things happen, and all sorts of things happen, of course, right? And there are many unfortunate things happening right now, many tragedies. You can see that picture of Puerto Rico, and that's one of the key themes that are being discussed in online communities right now. So what's the impact on your community? That's a key thing to consider, because like we saw in previous conversations, the way you design and engineer your community, your actual product, can have an effect on your community, on their behavior. So there are other things that affect behavior, and one of those things is exactly that, the world news and events. Let's just stop for a second to consider. One thing is for us to be aware of world events, but there's some events that affect our users. Some users might be in areas affected by hurricanes. Some users might be in areas affected by another type of tragedy. So it's affecting your community indirectly and directly as well. So having time to cope when those big news happen is crucial. You want to allow that. You want to give your community a chance to process everything that has happened so they can help each other, make sense of it, especially when people in your community have been affected. So one thing that I want to make sure that we are aware is be aware of bias perspective that can lead to polarization. So when I say this is when you are making your moderation decisions, you have to be very objective and consider that some of your actions might be polarizing. So you might be closing one of the opinions, and that can have a really bad effect. Also, objective moderation in the sense of we shouldn't really act on emotion. We should leave the personal opinions aside, and we should really act based on our community guidelines and our company guidelines. So we can be very on point, make decisions that are based on reason and based on what we're standing for, and not on our personal opinions. Okay, so just a quick warning here, and I think this has to do a lot to do with my role of trust and safety, because written content has an effect on us as much as pictures and videos. So it's not really dreadful language that I'm going to be sharing with you, but it definitely has layers to it. So I want to make sure that you're aware of what's coming ahead. So let's take a look at some terms that are being talked about, some things, some that are a little bit more recent, other that are not so recent anymore. But so we can see those are actual, this is actual chat that has been, that happened in online communities that I wanted to share with you. And this is all anonymized and also edited for the purpose of being able to share with everybody here. But the essence is there. So if we look at this, you look at the Las Vegas example, right? You have people that are just talking about what happened, right? They're just saying, I just found out, or pray for Vegas, but you can see the second one there. That's not very nice, right? And saying this definitely has an impact. Like I said before, you could have a lot of users from Las Vegas, or they had family affected. You look at the example from Irma, and that's another one that people were saying, Irma actually did damage to our place. I was hit by Irma. So you see the community rallying and saying, oh no, you were affected, and they want to help, they want to understand what's going on. I have one there, a couple that are in Portuguese, so I'll quickly translate for you. And it's basically they're saying, well, compare South Korea and North Korea. And then they're also saying, is Korea also communist? So I imagine they're referring to South Korea there and asking if it's also communist. You can see also Catalonia it has been on the news and somebody was referring to it. So you see a little bit of humor. We're going to talk about humor, like when does it go too far? And then also further conversation about North Korea and about Kim. So when we get to pop culture and internet lingo, and of course those things, they're interrelated, but Kofefe. If you remember, okay, is this a verb? Is this a noun? Because, well, first it trended on Twitter, but then I saw in many other communities, for example, people using it as a noun. Call me Kofefe, or they're saying, I will name my firstborn Kofefe. And then somebody even saying, are you afraid to Kofefe? And based on the nuances and the connotation, I saw that users were using Kofefe as a sexual verb. So you can see how this really changes the whole dynamic. If you don't know what Kofefe is, you could be completely oblivious to situations that could be detrimental to your community because of the ways that the users are going to use it. Oh, sorry, just a quick thing here. So for the blue whale, is it a memo? Is it a game? Now it's probably getting a little old, but I wanted to share with you some real examples as well where players are saying, don't play it, or have you heard of this game? Others that are more recent, so we have the KYS. So if you don't know about this, it is kill yourself. So people use this, and sometimes they use this as a hashtag, and they will say this. That's double-edged sword for sure, because it could be somebody saying this to a friend, or it could actually be used in a very harassing and encouraging way, encouraging in terms of suicide and bullying, which is really awful. But you see how it could go both ways. And then you have one that's trending now like crazy, which is the Me Too hashtag, connected to Harvey Weinstein. So I was thinking here, Leah, what if we do something here? It could be a good experiment. So if you go to our demo site, the community safe demo site, just so for everybody who is listening right now, we have this demo site that gets information from the public fire hose, the public Twitter fire hose. So we have public tweets coming into the demo site. And I'll ask Leah now to use our chat viewer to be able to hone in and search specifically for that hashtag #MeToo. And then towards the end of the workshop, let's take a look, and then Leah will share the screen with everybody so we can see what came up in the meantime regarding #MeToo.
Great. And actually, before we move on to the next slide here, I'm going to have a second poll for you guys. Just wondering, does your community talk about breaking news and the latest trends? Seeing a lot of yeses, which I think makes sense. Okay, great. So I'm going to end the polling here. Let's take a look at the results. So yeah, we're seeing 100% yes, which is, again, I don't think it's surprising. It's the internet. People talk about what's happening online.
Exactly. It's just no way to escape that right now, right? Okay, so I wanted to share some resources with you, and as usual, you will receive a PDF version of this workshop, I believe, right? So you'll have access to those as clickable links, but it's just some suggestions for you. So of course, Twitter and reviewing trending hashtags will give you a nice view of things that are trending and things that are happening on the spot. Google News, of course. You can set up Google Alerts. I have Google Alerts set up for specific terms, like bullying, cyberbullying, so I am aware of what's going on in the world. And there are also aggregate sites that are relevant to your community. So you could, there are many great sources, but here are some ideas. Kotaku for online games. And also Super Awesome has an amazing newsletter for under 13 communities, which I believe they put out every week. And it's really, really strong and gives a nice view on what's happening on the under 13 world. Okay, so this is kind of a halfway checkpoint for you, and I just wanted to give you some takeaways that you can already think about. So build a team that's knowledgeable and up to date with internet lingo and pop culture. And the other point is use a system that allows you to change words and sentences on the fly. I cannot stress how important that is. Language changes fast and there's no time to waste. So ideally, if you're using a system that benefits both from machine learning and also from human expertise and allows you to adjust things, it's really important that you do it fast, because as you're going to see, most likely with this hashtag, me too, in a small time, a lot of things come up. And if you don't adjust on the fly, you may miss a lot of things, and your community will be talking about things that spread like wildfire. Okay, so now we get to the actual protocol, and we'll talk about how does it look like and what do we do when something like this happens. So it's a 6-step protocol that I put together for you. The first and very important point is a human-informed vocabulary step that involves a brainstorming, involves using some of those resources that I were giving to you, and also having your team together to be prepared when this happens. Second one is we evaluate what's going on in the community. We evaluate how chat is around those topics. Then we adjust, and we adjust the rules. We make sure that we're not creating a lot of false positives or false negatives, and we validate that. Step number 5 is actually looking at tools that leverage business intelligence and allows us to look at stats and trends so we can actually understand the big picture of what's going on. And then we reevaluate vocabulary over time, because internet lingo changes so quickly. We can't just make a change and trust that that will be permanent. So the first step, human-informed vocabulary. I'm using an example that's Charlottesville. So first thing we want to do is compile the relevant vocabulary with your team. So it might be a really good activity for a whole team or some appointed team members. So you can use the vocabulary that you find on those resources that, like I mentioned, and also out of the very knowledge of your team. So for example, for Charlottesville, some of the relevant vocabulary that I'm suggesting here you should take a look at in this particular example would be looking at alt-right, would be looking at white supremacists, white supremacy, Antifa, KKK, Nazi, Nazis, and then Confederate flag. So those are some of that's a little bit of the vocabulary you should be aware of. So once you do that, you have determined what you're looking for. You have determined what you want to pay attention to. But your users will also tell you new things, so you should be aware and you should adjust accordingly. The second step is so important is now we step beyond assumptions. So the first one was really a basic step that's a no-brainer. There's certain terms that are definitely bound to come up. However, now we need to go beyond assumptions. How is your community actually chatting about it, and not just suppositions from your team? Then you consider, okay, how about other languages? So are you empowered to deal with the trends that are happening in other languages in other countries? So for example, let's say you allow KKK in this Charlottesville example. And I know that some people watching, you probably don't allow this in your community for being an under 13 community and having specific guidelines. But let's take this example. So if you allow it, there's so many ways your users could talk about KKK, right? They could say, KKK is coming for your people. It's not a very nice thing to say. You could say, I was KKK though. I support the KKK. The KKK is not cool. Join the KKK now. And for that matter, they could just say the KKK. So how do you deal with that? So you evaluate now, you evaluate what's coming up, and you look at this. Is this breaking our terms of use or not? Is this something that we should allow players and users to talk about? If we don't, what's the consequence? So that's exactly the point of adjusting. So you adjust chat rules on the fly, and you see how often was that expression used. Was it only one time in a million lines of chat? So having a tool that allows you to do this is very important. Was it 20 times in a million lines of chat? If that's the case, then there's a way bigger impact. So consider word count, consider how many times it's happened. Then when you adjust a rule, you see that it has happened many times and you need to adjust, what's the impact? So for example, I took some screenshots from our tool just to show you some visuals from Community Sift and what's the impact of changing something. So if you have the term KKK identified with a specific topic and you create that rule to block that, well, what's gonna happen when you look into your chat sample and you look at what people are actually saying? If you make it too heavy-handed and you completely block it, then somebody who is gonna say the KKK is not cool, that would be blocked. Or maybe they're just talking about what happened last week or what happened yesterday. However, you want to make sure that you're also capturing things that you don't want to be said in chat. So in that case, you have the examples there. I support the KKK, or KKK is coming for you. You can see that I highlighted one that you could consider a false positive because they're just saying it was the KKK. And depending on how you set and adjust this rule, the consequences could be too heavy-handed, and then you're going to make things too strict. Another one to consider, going back to languages, is have you by accident created rules that are too strict and now people cannot chat where it's completely unrelated? For example, Brazilian Portuguese has a way of expressing laughter that is just like lol, and it's exactly KKK. It could be 4 Ks, it could be 5, it could be 3. So of course, the overlap of English and Portuguese here would be really concerning. So you want to make sure that those things are separate. You want to make sure that what's happening in Portuguese is considered differently than English. Otherwise, you're going to make things too strict. For sure, in Portuguese, people still say KKK, but by far, when they say KKK, it's related to laughter. So let's take a look at the validation step here. So when we get to the validation step, it's where you need to take a really good look and say, okay, I need to be clear about where I draw the line. And again, accordingly to your terms of use, accordingly to your community guidelines, your team guidelines, so you act in a very objective way and not based on emotions or based on your personal opinion. You ensure a low amount of false positives and negatives by taking a really hard look at this, and you definitely need to have some tools that allow you to do this, right? You don't want to have just a small window to look at what's going on in your community. So I would say 2 things are very important. If you have a live view of your community chat, especially one that allows you to hone in and look at different types of topics. So if you have millions of lines of text, how do you look at what matters most for you in that specific topic? So you know what's going on. Then having tools that allow you to timely find false positives and false negatives, that will make your life much, much easier. So as an example here, we have something from the Community Sift tool as well. There is a report called False Positives Report, and it leverages user reputation and intelligent automation. So if you have a user who is a trusted user in the system, they usually say things that are all right. Then you compare what they have been saying in the last lines of text that are hitting a high risk or hitting a certain topic. So that's likely to be a false positive. So that's one way of leveraging business intelligence and reports to your advantage in this case. The next step for us here is the stats and trends. So we go a little bit deeper into this. If you have a way of compiling a report of trends and word count, this will make a world of difference. Again, because it's not based on assumption, it's based on what's actually happening in your community and what's the impact that it's having. So there are a few different things you can do. You can have a common words by risks to a kill. You could have just a report of the most common phrases. This allows you to understand what's happening on the day of the event. So how is it trending? And later on, what's the usage of those terms that you have identified, of that vocabulary, after 24 hours or after 48 hours? Is it still relevant? Should you change anything? Again, some examples of reports that are currently available in the Community SIF 2. We are able to display common words by different risks, also examples for topics, and common phrases. One thing that can be extremely powerful is when you are able to create a custom topic, for example. Let's say the situation with Charlottesville just happened. You want to identify specific phrases that are trending in your community and beyond, trending in social media. You are able to use a custom topic so you can really hone in and know what's going on around that conversation. Now you want to reassess vocabulary. So you want to keep going because things change. The internet lingo changes so fast. Back in November, I believe last year, the terms Googles, Yahoos, and Skypes, and also the parentheses, like you're saying there, were code terms used on Twitter when people were trying to bypass moderation back then. And they were trying to use hate speech terms and conversation. So that was the case in November 2016. How is it being used right now? If you change that back in November 2016, you need to be aware of how that's evolved. And here is also a difference between flagging and blocking. Maybe you don't necessarily want to block certain terms, but you want to be aware of it, how it's being used. So be aware of that. Classifying and having a view into something sometimes might be better than blocking it, even before you consider what you want to block. Also, a quick curiosity there for you. You have to be aware that sometimes there is counter speech and there is ways that people use to subvert a certain trend or negative trend. So this case of the parentheses inverted, people were actually using it as counter speech on Twitter and other places. So if you're blocking something, you need to be aware that you may also be blocking counter speech. So again, going back to that idea of creating a biased approach and polarizing when you're making moderation decisions. So I want to quickly stop here and just see if we have any questions before we move on.
All right, doesn't look like it, I'm not seeing any, but feel free to pop your questions in at any time.
Sounds good. A couple of challenging questions for everybody, and it would be nice to have a discussion here. So if you have a question, you can post it, or perhaps a comment. It would be good to hear if you have faced those challenges. Do you think quoting hate speech is okay for the purpose of discussing it? Would you allow it in your community? Again, we go back to that idea. Would you allow people to talk about the KKK or their ideologies if they're quoting it or quoting something that happened around the world? and also a very a tricky one, which is humor. Where does it cross the line? So we can see that humor is used for coping with a lot of things that happen. We're looking at the Harvey example there and Irma example. People use this as a way of coping, right? If they have been affected, they may use some humor that actually helps the situation. But when does it cross the line? Anybody has any input about that? Have you seen it crossing the line in your community?
Well, what about you, Carlos? What's your take on quoting hate speech?
It's a very challenging one, and I would say if your community guidelines, like if you're under 13 and you absolutely don't allow certain terms, then that's a no-brainer, right? You have to, that's the main priority. However, if you have a different mentality perhaps regarding this, because I know some under 13 communities that do allow certain terms to be discussed, I would say quoting it, depending on the audience and depending on the resilience of your community, is completely okay. It's actually a way for them to cope with it, to understand it. So there's education involved. There is an element of empower them to talk about something in a safe way. So absolutely, I'll say quoting a hate speech may be adequate for some communities. But again, you really want to know how it's being used.
Right. Can you actually expand on that concept of resilience a little bit?
Resilience?
We've talked about it before. Just if people on the call here haven't heard that before, it'd be interesting to hear your take on it.
For sure. So in terms of community resilience, I would say for some communities, they have a bigger resilience when it comes to seeing certain terms, right? For example, seeing a hate speech term or perhaps a slur, seeing a swear word, what's the impact? I think this is something that traditionally a lot of children's websites have battled with a lot in the past. So seeing, let's say, a swear word, maybe 5 years ago or more for certain communities was a no-no, right? And for some, still is. Others, though, they understand that there are things that are much more dangerous than seeing a swear word. So it really depends. Some communities, they will draw the line very low because of having children there. Others, if they actually see a swear word or if they see a certain type of lingo or slang, it's okay. They can handle it depending on their age, depending on the tools that you're giving to them as well to be able to report. However, when we're talking about some of the content, if it's extremely damaging, like extreme hate speech, or we're talking about things that lead to self-harm, people encouraging and very strong types of harassment, then the resilience bar might be way in a very different place. Don't necessarily want to expose the community to that sort of content, right?
Right, that makes sense, yeah. Thanks.
Any other comments?
No, we actually had a comment from Maddie. She said, agree with Carlos. However, I think when major trends are happening, the contexts need to be monitored closely to ensure the expected contexts are being quoted.
Absolutely. To add a little bit more of complexity to this, you have negatives, you have double negatives on top of quoting, right? Somebody may say, again, the KKK is not cool, yeah. Right? The KKK is cool, the KKK is not cool. A negative makes a big change.
Yeah, this is the crazy complexity of language at work, right?
Absolutely. It's not there isn't an easy solution to this. I would say relying just on the computer, just on machine learning is not very wise because the computer doesn't get all the nuances. And relying just on a team, just on moderators is not scalable. So that combination of a team that's very knowledgeable, that they're up to date, that perhaps they have even time to research every week. That's a very wise thing to have purposeful moderation, purposeful research. So you have also an understanding of your trends weekly, pulling reports weekly so you know how it's affecting. Then you can present those reports to stakeholders internally and show how important it is to do this type of research. So you can make a business case for this, right?
Actually, we have a great question from Lynn. She says, in terms of flagging versus blocking, are you suggesting custom topics to make good reporting for those? That's actually a great question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Custom topics are a big favorite of mine in Community Sift. They allow you to do exactly that, Lynn, which is you don't necessarily want to block those terms. If you're just tracking them and you're flagging them, absolutely. It's a great way to leverage those custom topics. And then you can pull reports through them. You can use the custom topics to have the live chat view and really hone in as well. Very, very powerful. Very powerful for usernames as well, because usernames are also affected by those trends. People may create names like Harvey Weinstein. They may create that name. Do you allow this in your community for somebody to say that? Or perhaps they create a name of a political figure. Depending on where your community is, for example, if you have communities in China, there may be regulations on you to not allow users to create a name with political figures from China, right? So being able to leverage custom topics is key, because it allows you to identify specific things or block specific things without overlapping with other topics, if that makes sense. You really hone in.
You know, when you mention usernames, that actually reminds me of Carlos and I have a shared background at Club Penguin as moderators. And I remember when I initially started with Club Penguin, it was, oh my gosh, 2007. And so Miley Cyrus as Hannah Montana was hugely popular at that time. Very wholesome. It was a Disney show. And so her name, both Miley Cyrus and Hannah Montana, would pop up in usernames a lot. And at that point, we would allow it because it's an under 13 community, very young kids. But then I guess as her persona and her focus kind of changed and she started to get a little more sexual and she left Hannah Montana, there came a time when the question was, well, do we allow Miley Cyrus names anymore because her persona has changed? And that again comes from something, I don't remember if Carlos mentioned this, but at Club Penguin, we as moderators spent a huge amount of time researching pop culture and understanding the nuances of what kids were looking at, what they were paying attention to, and the effect that it had on them. And I think that the Miley Cyrus one, that just jogged my memory. I remember that being a big question at the point when she started to kind of shift who she was away from that very wholesome Disney character. I don't know if you remember that as well, Carlos.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great example and really illustrates our whole conversation today, how quickly it may change, how it may impact your community, the way that they identify with those icons, right? They identify with songs, with movies. So understanding it and being able to adjust and adapt is really crucial. I wanted to also mention here that for us here at To Hat Security, the way we approach trends on community safety is very much rooted on this, very much rooted on that understanding. And we have a wonderful team that is consistently analyzing chat and being aware of trends and making sure that we're capturing this on a global level. We have many, many different clients. So the benefit here is when we identify a trend in one community, it doesn't necessarily need to go and badly affect another community right away, because we are taking action, and that benefit and a new trend that we recognize gives another community already a big leg up, because they see, oh, that's already trending. Community Sift has identified this. We can already benefit from those rules and be proactive, be ahead of the game. So it's really like the power of a large community that we have of clients, and I'm very fortunate to work with a lot of our clients and partners so we can disseminate that knowledge, and we can be aware of those things through different conversations like this workshop. We can be also benefiting from using tools like this. We can share the knowledge. We don't have to experience all those that type of detrimental chat and get that to be coming into us like right away, if we can already learn from the experience of others. So this is a really good way to leverage that. Okay, so I would like to recap, and if you have questions too, we're gonna have some time for you to ask them. Just want to recap the importance of purposeful moderation, fostering that knowledgeable team, and a learning culture around making the best possible moderation decisions. This comes back to a team that understands trends, pop culture, what's going on in the world, and how it affects their teams. Plus, you add that element of making objective decisions, leaving your personal opinions on the side, and avoiding creating a biased environment. Then we go into expression and user retention. You want to empower open speech and allow community to cope with major events. It's a big part of connecting as human beings on your community. You don't want to limit that. Preventing damage interactions, and that's a key one, because same time you want to open conversations, you want to ensure civil discussions that don't jeopardize user experience and don't drive users away from your game or platform. I think it would be a good time to take a look at the hashtag that we were looking at, which was the Me Too hashtag, probably 20 minutes ago or so. So I'll have Leah share the screen quickly here.
Sure.
Before we go to and see if there are any questions.
Okay, so bear with me for 1 second, guys. Okay, there we go. So yes, I've had this running since we started the webinar here. You can actually see that sorry, it's taking a second. The hashtag #MeToo is obviously incredibly popular on Twitter right now, but you can kind of see the impact that it's having kind of as we scroll through here.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and again, I mean, Twitter obviously has millions and millions of users at one time. But you can see that even just in the 43 minutes that we've been running this, you can see the effect that it's having on the community, which I think is fairly indicative of how a trending topic or any kind of breaking news would break really quickly and keep moving fast through any kind of community. And yeah, it just kind of keeps going and going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You can see even. I believe we're talking about a small percentage of the Twitter public fire hose that's coming through. And that's already giving you, that's such a big sample, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a good takeaway as well for everybody that's watching now, to see if this is actually coming up in your community, if the Me Too hashtag is coming up in your community, and how users are talking about this. So I'll share my screen again here quickly, and we can go to questions now. Any particular challenges that you have been facing? Any tools that you may be missing, or best practices that you're looking for to be able to have a better insight into trends and pop culture in your community? One question that might be nice to see. I think you have a poll as well, right, Leah? If you want to pull it up.
The question is, based on this workshop here, do you think that you'll be more aware of chat trends in your community going forward? This is great. This is good, you guys. So I'm going to end the polling. Let's launch it here. So it looks like it's a resounding yes, which is great. That's what we like to see. We do have a comment from our head of client success, Alicia, and she says, back to so many of us here kind of got our start in the industry in Club Penguin, and she mentions, remembering a time when coming to a consensus really can be difficult about these difficult topics, just because everyone has their own personal sensitivity. And one thing she mentions, which is great, is it helps to have criteria that you would base your decision on. So things like, has the person that people are talking about committed a crime? I think that's a really interesting one. Have they been convicted of a crime? Things like that, that really helps shape the decision making in a way that does take that personal bias and emotional, the emotional background out of a decision.
Excellent, absolutely. It's so important to have that as a sounding board, right? I know that teams have to make really tough decisions when it comes to text, but also when it comes to image. And deciding if an image is appropriate or not it can be a very difficult thing. And we have all sorts of bias that vary day by day as well. You might be more sensitive to a topic on a given day. So having a team that watches their back and actually having that openness and being able to say, you know what, this topic is affecting me today. I don't think I can make sound decisions, and deferring to your colleagues and having that support is so crucial, right? Yeah. And yeah, having a criteria, like Alicia said, having a soundboard, having a plan that shows you, okay, we allow this sort of conversation, but we don't allow this because of X factor or so. Mm-hmm. You want to be aware of why you're making a decision. Be very, very objective.
Absolutely. And I think one thing I've been thinking about a lot is Twitter really is your secret weapon when it comes to knowing what's happening in the world. I use it here personally. I'm checking it constantly for work reasons, of course, to see what are the trending hashtags. You can find out about a breaking news story immediately if you're watching Twitter regularly. So I think it's always a good idea, and Carlos had mentioned this earlier, is to have someone on your team really responsible for monitoring that and keeping an eye on what's happening in the world. It's one of the best ways to stay on top of what's happening in terms of both breaking news and trending topics. The concept of trending topics even started with Twitter, so of course that's the right place to look to find those hashtags and those things that are really affecting pop culture in a really immediate way.
Absolutely. Do we have any other comments or questions at this time?
No, actually, Alicia has another great one. She mentions sharing knowledge, and I remember this as well, as part of a daily workflow when we were all at Club Penguin. I always go back to that just because I think they had a really powerful and strong moderation process in place that can be replicated, not just for the younger communities, but also I think for any age. And so part of our actual workflow was knowing what was happening in the world and sharing it team-wide on a daily basis, which I think, even if you get anything out of this, that's one piece that I think is so incredibly crucial, and something that we do here as well is staying on top of things. And it's fun also. I mean, what's more fun than watching Twitter to see what's happening in the world, and paying attention to YouTube to see what's trending and what people are talking about. So it can actually make the moderator position, I think, even just that much more fun and dynamic and engaging, is to have that connection to the world and to what's happening.
Yeah, it's really almost like a different language.
Yeah.
Knowing a different language, knowing the internet lingo, knowing the trends that are happening, and absolutely being able to share that with the company. Another one that you could consider too is, well, having reports that show you the most common phrases and topics that are going on, and also what users are saying about things overall. You can use those custom topics also to track what users are saying about a specific new feature that you have released. how that's affecting the community as well. So there are many things that affect chat and behavior for you to have that view and share with stakeholders and other people in your community, in your work, that not necessarily have contact with what your users are saying. Maybe your engineers are not seeing what your users are saying. Your product team, who are actually making decisions about the product, if they know how your community is reacting to trends and to different events in your product and outside your product, it could be a very powerful tool for them, for executives and other people in your company. All right. So, well, thank you everybody for attending today, for taking part. It was really good to talk about this topic. It is never ending. So please do revisit this and keep up the conversation. If you are a community SIFT client, please do contact us if you have questions about the product, how to leverage those reports, how to leverage what community SIFT has in place. If you're a client or not, feel free to contact me as well. My email address is there. I'm happy to talk about those topics, anything that's related to trust and safety, to community. And if you're not a community SIFT client and you would like to know more about the tool and chat about your specific needs regarding chat or username, please send us an email to hello@2hat.com. It would be great to hear from you.
Yeah, and before everyone goes, I did want to let you know we have a really, really exciting webinar coming up. We don't have a date for it yet. We're still ironing out the details, and this goes back to all of our references to Club Penguin today, funnily enough, is we will be having Lance Preep, who's one of the co-founders of Club Penguin, on to talk about some of the lessons that he learned in creating one of the biggest kids' virtual worlds, and one that has kind of inadvertently brought you quite a few of the people who work here at 2hat. So we're really excited about that. I'll be sending out an update once I have a date for everyone. We'd love for you guys to come and see that. And I will be sending out a follow-up email here with the recording of the video and a PDF as well, so you can share that with your teams and with anyone else that you'd like to share it with. And again, thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.